Hello, and welcome to another edition of Your Therapist Needs Therapy, the podcast where two mental health professionals talk about their mental health journeys and how they navigate mental health while working in the mental health field. I'm your host, Jeremy Schumacher, licensed marriage and family therapist, trying a new setup today. In case you're a regular listener and my sound quality is weird, had a touch of flash flooding here in the Milwaukee, Wisconsin area, and my normal recording spot was a part of a finished basement, which is finished no longer. So trying out some different stuff. We'll see how everything sounds and put it up regardless, because I don't record ahead of time enough to have a bunch of episodes recorded. But today's episode is a fun one, a special episode. Not that I want to be a news podcast, but we got some breaking news. Last week, Dr. James Dobson, founder of Focus on the Family, founder of A Lot of Child Abuse, founder of Purity Culture Bullshit, he died. And it's not the obituary that I've been most looking forward to, but it is one that was pretty high up there that definitely we're going to talk about why we're celebrating. And I don't expect any of my listeners to be chiming in with this sort of like respect the dead talking point. But just to clear any of that up, my stance on that is very firmly in the idea that if you want to be respected in death, you need to lead a respectful life. And James Dobson was a piece of trash in life, and so we can treat him like a piece of trash in death. This is a man who will leave behind just a legacy of animal abuse, child abuse, authoritarianism. He was an important step in the right-wing religious machine becoming tied to the right-wing political machine. And yeah, just a garbage person with really terrible takes who never should have been platformed anywhere. And he's a fascinating case study in sort of what is wrong, not just with like modern Christianity, but the evangelical movement and how someone like him could have a long and fruitful career and lead to some of the just dystopian nonsense we have today. And he was a psychologist, so I feel uniquely qualified to chime in on how garbage his takes were. I was also raised in a family that had Dobson books up on the shelf. I will say my parents maybe were not. I didn't plan to get into this. I would say my parents were not necessarily super into it. We were evangelical. I was raised Wells, which is Wisconsin Evangelical Lutheran Synod, which is a very small sect, pretty much just in the Midwest. But Milwaukee is the mecca of the Wells, and if I can sort of cross religious references here. And so it's a big deal. My parents are well known in the Wells and worked at very public ministries. So, yeah, I don't know. James Dobson was a name that I knew because we had his books on the shelves. My parents spanked all of us kids. I wouldn't say it was because Dobson said they should, but I think Dobson, like a lot of kids, grew up with this idea that like it was not only okay, but recommended. So, fuck James Dobson. Gonna say that a couple more times this episode. Dobson was a trained psychologist, and somebody who went to like real schools. I'm always sort of quick to highlight when somebody was like a Liberty University grad or like a GCU grad or whatever. Some of the people who are leading the evangelical movement now are just trained in like seminary or their own little quirky Christian colleges where they didn't actually learn anything other than their own apologetics. Dobson doesn't have that excuse. He should have known better because he went to better schools. But he didn't. So I did a little bit of research before recording this episode just to be a little bit more well-informed on sort of his early life and his upbringing. If you said, hey, Jer, we got a public figure who was born in Shreveport, Louisiana in 1936, I'm going to be curious what their thoughts on race were, just given time and place, right? And Dobson, unfortunately, doesn't have good ideas on race or class. None of his ideas were good. He was a garbage person. And again, like, could have been better and wasn't. Like, he studied at USC. So again, it's not like he was like, grew up in a podunk town in the deep South and is racist because of that. Like, no, he's a racist because he's racist, because he believes racist ideology. He did work, he was like assistant for Paul Popenoe. It was a well-known eugenicist. And like, that's not just me calling someone a eugenicist in this moment of fascism here in America, but like, no, like he was a big proponent of eugenics here in America. And that's who Dobson worked for. And again, I don't think that was like, oh, poor Dobson was brainwashed by this guy. I think Dobson went out of his way to work with this guy. One of my fascinations in life is studying some of the overlap between the alt-right sort of neo-Nazi movements and various hate groups and Christianity, because they're overlapped now. They always were, but like overtly so now. The mask has really come off. But this is one of those instances where I think like the overlap's really obvious, and anybody who is pro-religion now, I think, has to answer some questions about like, why wasn't this a deal breaker for you? Because we've known about stuff like this since the 70s. But yeah, Dobson took those sort of eugenicist ideas that he was taught. And I see people talking about Popenoe as, I don't know how to say his last name, Popenoe, as like the father of family therapy, which just isn't true. That might be like what Christian and like conservatives who don't actually know what research looks like call him, because I only saw it on his Wikipedia page, but I had never heard it. And I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist who's been doing family therapy for 16 years, and I'd never heard of this guy. So he did not have the impact that I think people want him to have. And James Dobson certainly coined or called himself America's family counselor, which again, like, don't give yourself nicknames. If you're a pro wrestler, you can kind of get away with it because you're a carny. But otherwise, you don't get to do that. But so Dobson comes from a long line of racism and eugenicist thinking, and he propagated that by really advocating for marrying within your own race. He was anti-feminist and anti-LGBTQ plus movement. He said Sandy Hook was God punishing America for gay people existing, or for letting gay people exist. I don't know. He was a proponent of conversion therapy. Like, any number of these things I could go into detail on like why they're wrong and garbage, and why Dobson was the garbage person for believing it. And I'm just gonna sort of sum a lot of it up to say none of it was ever based on research. And that's one of the big issues with Dobson as a quote unquote psychologist. Same with like Jordan Peterson as a more modern version, perhaps, of like somebody maybe went to school and got licensed, but if they're not keeping up their licensure and they're not engaging in like staying up to date on the research, you can tell, because they're just sharing opinions, right? And like, I'm recording right now for a podcast. Like, these are my educated thoughts. I am currently licensed and in good standing, unlike Jordan Peterson or James Dobson, mostly because he's dead. I don't know when he let his license lapse. I don't believe he was actually licensed for his entire career. But yeah, like, he published a book on his own printing and started his own printing company, which is what happens a lot with evangelicals and Christian thought leaders. I put that into quotes. Podcast, you can't see me. They're not thought leaders. They're somebody who has an idea that is disproven by science. And so they go and they start their own publishing house so that they can get their books out there. And like, the conservative sort of movement is way more aligned than the not conservative movement. Progressives are a much wider range of people and thoughts and concerns than the conservative movement is. So if you have your own publishing house, it's way easier to get some of these thoughts out on the right wing than on the left. And that's why Dobson was such an influential figure. He sort of followed the Jerry Falwell model of like, start your own media empire and get the word out there. But Dobson worked for multiple presidential administrations. He was a pretty big deal in the evangelical movement, not just from his own publishing stuff. But he started to focus on the family in 1977, and that's where a lot of this stuff came out, not just with his own publishing house for the books that he wrote, but also that was a regular a group of regular publications, whether it's magazine or blog posts. They adjusted for the internet, but he sort of pretended to blend Christianity with psychology. But again, like nothing he brought up from psychology was based on any sort of research or fact. I can cite psychologists from who would have been his peers at the time, who would have said, hey, hitting your kids is bad. Don't do that. And so, again, this idea that he was a licensed psychologist masquerades as some sort of credibility when nothing he was saying or doing was actually based in science or research. And it was, even in 1970, would have been going against some of what we already understood. He advocated for abusing children, literally hitting them with a belt or a rod or a switch made from the stick, which, like, again, I was sort of, I think, tongue-in-cheek bringing up Shreveport, Louisiana as probably not like what you think of as in the 1930s as what you think of an enlightened place to be born. Like, I think that's definitely true with the switch idea. I think even, I grew up in the 90s. I think to a degree using like a instrument to hit your kids had fallen out of favor by then. Although there were threats made in my childhood from my grandma mostly for using a ruler or the yardstick is the big threat. I don't remember that ever happening. I'm sure my older siblings would tell you different. I think there's a threat of like a wooden paddle and certainly a wooden spoon, and certainly jokes about like the spoon with the hole in the middle that you use to like pick up certain types of pastas allows for more velocity if you're going to use it for beating your child. Like, again, that's a very fucked up thing to talk about and joke about and think is okay. But I do, at least from personal experience, think some of that was starting to fall out of favor in the 90s. And again, because research had been out there since the 70s, 80s that you shouldn't be doing this. So Dobson's line of thinking, again, was just his own, because he wanted to beat children and also animals, was that you take a strong-willed child and you break their will the same way you would break the will of an animal, which for anybody who's ever taken like a dog obedience class knows that's also not how you treat animals. And so this is just abuse. This is just abuse masquerading as scripture. Also, like misquoted scriptures. This is a pet peeve of mine. But like spoil the rod, spare the rod, spoil the child is, again, Shakespeare. That's not in the Bible. There's a line in Proverbs that's like sort of kind of that idea, but the spare the rod, spoil the child is again like what happens with Christianity a lot, where people think that's biblical because it sounds clever or witty, but it was somebody else cleaning it up. Our whole idea of hell is just based on Dante's Inferno, like none of that's biblical. Anyway, so Dobson was really influential in turning abuse into love and saying not only can parents hit their kids, but they should be hitting their kids. And then again, like the fuckery of not just like, hey, it's cool to beat your children like you beat your animals. You shouldn't be doing either of those things. Just again, to clarify and underline like 30 times, there's so much evidence that says this is bad and causes trauma. But he also advocated, like, if you hit them with a belt, leave the belt on their dresser so they see it all the time. Like, that's just psychological abuse then too, right? So he's advocated for physical abuse, and then he's advocated for psychological abuse, and then he says you should like hug it out because he wants there to be a trauma bond, which is what people who are, again, like torturing people do, not what people who are doing secure attachment do. And again, like attachment theory was around here, like Maslow did his work in the 50s on his hierarchy of needs. Like the understanding that safety was needed for proper development is first and foremost what predated Dobson and his work. And like, again, whoever's talking about the eugenicists as being the father of marriage therapy, like hasn't studied marriage therapy. Again, like Carl Whitaker, people were doing work in the 1950s. Like the humanist movement in psychology had already happened, which is like centering your client and their needs as opposed to like the therapist as the expert. So I'm not saying it was without I'm not saying it was without fail or flaws. Like even Whitaker was not awesome all the time, even though he did really great transformative work. Like his ideas wouldn't have all held up particularly well now. That's a separate topic for a different podcast. One of the other big things that Dobson pushed was the hierarchical understanding of the Bible. Again, just like ignoring most of Jesus' teachings in the Gospels and focusing on an angry God in the Old Testament, and then like some of the apocalyptic teachings in at the end of the New Testament. And so we sort of like, if you ever see protests, whether it's like we're going to start protesting for marriage equality again, cool, going back to the 1950s here. But abortion, to like no hate like Christian love is a common slogan when the religious right is trying to take away rights from people. The religious political movement on the right, not that they're ever correct about anything, they're never right. Like no hate like Christian love. I think that goes back to Dobson. Like I think Dobson was a pretty formative figure in taking something like abuse, taking something like authoritarian control, and trying to dress it up in Christian love. And then he did that with the same thing with his anti-LGBTQ crusades, conversion therapy. Again, like conversion therapy is something that no board of licensure supports. It is not supported by science. It is considered abuse. It is abuse. It's considered abuse because it is. And so Dobson like did all this stuff again with this idea that like there's a hierarchy that's in place, and it goes God, then the man, then his wife, and then their children. But again, like allowing for abuse just across the board, requiring women to have sex with their husbands every 72 hours, or the husband might hit her or go have an affair. And like Dobson was a figure of his time in a lot of ways, again, because like some of his early writings, he's not anti-abortion. And then as people get less racist, not like it has gone away. Jesus. It's not fun to talk about these topics and be like, society is moving the wrong direction. Society as a whole, human civilization is not, but America is. But again, like Dobson using abortion then as a rallying cry when it didn't seem to be that important to him, because we can pretty much track in history where the religious right started caring about abortion because they needed it something else other than school desegregation, which was Jerry Falwell's big thing. So Dobson coming in later, again, like his writings early in his career versus later, abortion, how big a deal abortion was changed because it was politically expedient, not because he seemed to care, which is one of the things that if you study alt-right figures, whether it's James Dobson or it's neo-Nazis, like they are internally inconsistent. Like watch anything about neo-Nazis or like the Aryan Brotherhood, I think has a documentary up on HBO right now. And like they work with the Mexican cartel very closely. Like they're not white supremacists if it means they could have more money, right? Like they'll make business partnerships and relationships with people if it means they can have more money. And that's what James Dobson is too. Again, like millions, if not billions of dollars untaxed for his religious movements that then became political movements. And like the current leader of Focus on the Family says, oh, we're moving out of politics. But that's only when that doesn't make any sense, because you see how James Dobson started a political foundation, which is well funded at this point. So it's very convenient for Focus on the Family to now say they're not political when like, yes, no, like the thing that James Dobson set up is deeply political, and where we are in America is directly tied to what he did. And a lot of what he did was selling fear. Everything is a threat to the moral fibers of America. And whether that was because you were queer or because you were Black or because you wanted to get divorced because your partner was an abusive piece of shit, like he had that all as threatening, and that is going against God if you followed up on any of that. So yeah, I mean, lots of people. Last week was fun online because lots of people were celebrating his death, and because a lot of us who grew up in the 80s and 90s and even the early aughts would have been affected by this. parents thinking that you should hit your kid, and if you don't, that's bad parenting. And I think a lot of the like, this is going to hurt me more than it hurts you. Like, I don't know. I've never spanked our kids, but like even swatting your dog on the butt when they're doing something they're not supposed to, like that feels bad. Like, don't hit your animals. I have had two Great Dane rescues, Great Dane mixes that are big dogs that like I'm not hurting them. But like to give them a little swat when they're trying to jump up on the table, like they look hurt, right? They give you a look as like, oh, I thought you were my safe person. You rescued me and you feed me, and now you're coming at me. And like, yeah, you do obedience lessons and they teach you how to do reward, because rewards are more powerful for the brain than consequences are. Like that's true for humans. This is true for mammals. And so like, yeah, you use words and you redirect and you can do all of these things without hitting them. And like, I'm just talking about animals here. Definitely don't hit your kids. Definitely don't hit your animals. If you're somebody who's hitting things, go to therapy, and don't think that you should have authority over any other life form. But yeah, so Dobson shifted his focus. Again, he was part of the Bush administration. He's part of the Trump administration. No concern for like Trump's obvious criminal history, his treatment of women, because like Dobson made that all stuff all okay. Like church is a safe place for abusers in our modern society. It always has been, but again, mask off now. So yeah, like fuck James Dobson, and glad he's dead. All of his work was harmful. His legacy is not love or Christianity; it's trauma for generations. And it's, you know, set the table for a push to have a theocracy, which hopefully, fingers crossed, democracy will make a stand here. But yeah, I mean, it's a good thing when a bad person dies, and so it's addition by subtraction for the human race. This guy was a piece of trash who promoted abuse and trauma and wanted to say it was love, and he was just a deeply insecure man who wanted to feel better about himself by lording over authority and violence over other people. And so yeah, glad he's dead. Fuck that guy. Lots of cool people out in the world are doing great work to counteract his stuff. I mean, again, like marriage therapy as a institution has been saying don't hit your kids for decades. Like Dobson would not have been able to get, you know, peer-reviewed journal publication, which is why he had his own publishing house. So yeah, there's lots of way better qualified people out there talking about parenting, but on the like focus on the family front, lots of people out there doing cool work on social media and trying to have peer support groups. I will put some of that stuff in the show notes. The Strong-Willed Child movement is on Instagram. There's some great folks who have different podcasts or different work around just that concept. Names that because James Dobson's idea was the strong-willed child's will needed to be broken by hitting them. So I've seen some weird quotes from him. Again, like the hit your kid with the belt and then with the belt on their dresser so they keep seeing it as a reminder of your authority. It's like driving a Ford F-350. But some of the other things, like he said, kids shouldn't cry for like anything more than like 2 minutes, or otherwise that's them testing your authority. Like, no, it's like you're gonna beat your kid and they're gonna cry for 2 more minutes. You're gonna beat them again because they're testing your authority. Like, how petty and insecure do you have to be for that to be your stance? This guy was just a monster. So anyway, for people who are like, yeah, fuck James Dobson, I'm here with you celebrating his death. For people who are still harmed by it and working through that, lots of great folks out there. Again, we'll put some of that stuff in the show notes. Secular Therapy Project is obviously one that I recommend often if you're looking to start therapy for somebody who's not going to use religion. And the Reclamation Collective is another great directory out there. Recovering from Religion has great resources. We'll just have this is a good opportunity for me to do a resource dump down in the show notes. It's good to have that in as many places people can find it. Obviously, I have a resources tab on my website. But yeah, we'll have some specific people who are doing James Dobson related recovery work. Focus on your own family is one of the podcasts that comes to mind, and the Strong Willed Child. Lots of stuff there on social media. So we'll have links to all that stuff. This breaking news episode comes. I do have one other episode recorded, so we'll talk about Dobson comes up, ironically enough, in next week's episode, but also we'll talk about some of the other evangelical leaders who are pro-abuse and using some of Dobson's work. So you can tune in next week to hear more about religious trauma and some of the douchebag leaders out there who are somehow in high levels of our government as well. So that's fun. I try not to be super depressing about these topics, which is why we'll have resources down in the show notes. All right, y'all. Fuck James Dobson one last time here. Tune in next week to hear more about the new apostolic reform and some current bigots who are pushing for hierarchical forms of authoritarian control and Christian theocracy. So fun. And other cool resources, because, this is about mental health. All right, take care of yourself, take care of somebody else. Peace.